Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing why they weren't the one. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing why they weren't the one. So if you have been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you might feel like they are your only chance of happiness. In today's podcast, I'm discussing 3 reasons why your ex wasn't the one. So let's get straight into this, and point number 1 is you have many ones. So in my opinion, we all have many possibilities of people we can have successful long-term relationships with. Now you might listen to this and think that's nonsense. You might somewhat agree, but say, yeah, I can kind of see that, but they were the one. Well, hear me out. There are currently roughly 8 billion people in the world, roughly 4 billion men, and roughly 4 billion women. Even if we are to consider the area that you live and the age range that you are you still trying to tell me that there isn't a large population of possibility regarding of people you could connect with? The only thing which is preventing you from knowing this for certain is the fact that you have not spoken to that many people. Now, you might be somebody who acknowledges that and say, well, yeah, I met my ex when we were really young. And since the breakup, I've not really spoke to anybody. So I can agree with that. Or alternatively, you might be thinking, no, that's nonsense. I've been online dating. I've spoke to tens and tens of people. And there has been no connection like there was with my ex. Well, as I've just said, there are 4 billion men and 4 billion women. So even if you've spoken to tens and tens of people, that is not even scratching the surface of possibilities. And again, I am considering the age range and I am considering the area that you live, but still, I'm absolutely convinced you haven't maxed out your options. And I do genuinely believe that we all have multiple quote-unquote ones that we can have successful long-term relationships with. Now, whether or not they have the exact dynamic that you had with your ex, well, that is probably unlikely. I'll give you that. And that's because every dynamic is unique. But it doesn't mean it can't be wonderful. It doesn't mean it can't be incredible. It doesn't mean it can't be better in many, many ways, but perhaps in other ways not quite as good. And this is because if you can consider all of the ways and possibilities that we could rank a relationship, there are going to be many, many metrics that we were to consider. And maybe with your ex, you are ahead in some areas on some score, but then with your ex, you would actually be down and below in comparison to someone new. Yet, if you were to add up all of the scores from all of the metrics, you might find that somebody new is just as high as your ex, or maybe even surpassing them, even if in a few areas they might not be exactly as good as your ex. And this is my point. Every relationship is different, every connection is unique, but you can still find happiness. So when people say to me, I need to get my ex back, they were the one, what I want to say to you is, I don't believe they were your only one. They were one person that you had a lot of happiness with, a lot of success with, to a point, but sadly now you're broken up with. And therefore we have to consider that. That is the elephant in the room. That is something that people don't want to reflect upon when they say, my ex is the one. Well, you have to consider that right now, sadly, you're not together. So even though you might have seen that in them, right now, they are not seeing that in you. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get your ex back. It doesn't mean that you can't live happily ever after with your ex further down the line. But right now, we have to acknowledge, we have to admit that this is not working. Even if we feel we would like it to, our ex has made a choice that they don't want to be part of this at this moment. Again, it might change, but it might not. And therefore, any new potential connection where you and this new person want to be together will automatically surpass the connection you currently have with your ex, because your ex sadly doesn't want to be a part of it. So if we consider somebody who wants to be with you, even if at first you might be reluctant to consider it, if you got to know them, if you really delved in deep and got to see whether there are elements which are better than your ex, and maybe adding all of the metrics combined, they're actually very similar in a score to your ex, if you gave them a chance, the fact that you're giving them a chance and they want to be with you automatically gives all of the bonus points possible because this new person actually wants to be with you, and sadly right now your ex doesn't. Again, this doesn't mean you can't get your ex back, but we're looking at things right now. When people say to me, I want my ex back, they were the one. They are the one. They're the only one I want. But you have to understand that a relationship takes two people. It takes two to tango. It takes two people to want to be in a relationship. And if your ex doesn't want to be, then sadly, they're not the one. Because your quote-unquote one would at least have to be somebody who wants to be a part of it. The difference between your ex and somebody that you could view on your television screen right now is very minimal. If you have a favourite actor or actress that you almost fantasize that you would like to be in a relationship with, well, they, right now, are not in a relationship with you, and neither is your ex. So as ludicrous as that might sound to say, what is the difference? Your ex is as far away right now as the movie star. Now don't get me wrong, of course, logistically you stand more chance of getting your ex back than dating a movie star per se, but you see what I'm trying to say here. We're looking at things from the prism of a situation that you are in, and you sadly are not with your ex because they don't want to be with you right now, and therefore somebody who does want to be with you is going to surpass them as a potential quote-unquote one, because both people must at least want to be together to make that a consideration. In my opinion, there are many ones that you could have a successful, happy, fulfilling, exciting, long-term relationship with. And some of those people, I believe, would actually surpass the experiences you had with your ex. And the others, well, if you both want to be together, then that would surpass what you have with your ex right now, because sadly, they aren't with you. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is you don't currently align. And this is my point that I touched upon in point number 1, where we're going to now expand upon this. Right now, you and your ex don't align. You might not like the sound of this. You might think, actually, we do align. It's just circumstances which is preventing us being together. But I would argue that those circumstances could be overcome if there was true alignment between you. Sometimes people say, well, there is a distance problem or a work problem or something is a problem which is keeping us apart. But I honestly believe that if both people are on the same page, if they feel they are aligned, if there is a future plan of action, then anything can be surpassed and achieved within a relationship. And therefore, if a circumstance is the reason given for a breakup, then in my belief, the relationship wasn't strong enough to withstand that situation. Whereas I do believe that certain relationships with certain other people could have withstood this scenario. Now, every situation is different, every circumstance is different. I can't, of course, consider every single possible circumstance that you might throw at me in the comments and say, hey, what about this? Okay, there might be something which I can't think of right now, but generally speaking, the type of circumstances that people say are the reason for their breakup, I do believe can be surpassed. And that is because even if you can't see each other too much right now, if there is enough love between you, if there is a plan of action so that you can be together in the future, then ordinarily this can be got through if both people are feeling a high level of romantic emotional attraction for each other. If you're not, if one of you, i.e. your dumper, is sadly not feeling enough attraction, then this is a situation where a circumstance can really break a relationship. And this is because, in my belief, sadly, right now, you aren't aligned. Because if you were, you would be able to work through this. Now, when you and your ex first got together, you were both feeling a high level of romantic emotional attraction for one another. And you would have been very much aligned. Yes, you can be different people. Yes, you can have different hobbies and interests. That's very healthy. That's very important to have. But when it came to the fundamentals, you were aligned and you were in love. And maybe in the future, you will be again. But right now, sadly, you're not. You've grown apart. or maybe a certain action has caused a loss of attraction, i.e. cheating, i.e. bad use of money, etc., whatever it may have been, which caused your ex to end the relationship. But it could have been due to you growing apart. And that is a classic example of where you were once very much aligned, but sadly now you're not. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean your ex is a bad person. It just means that as you've both grown through the months and years, you've deviated on different paths. It's very healthy to grow. We need to grow. But if we don't grow in the same direction, the relationship will not work in the future. And therefore, maybe your ex was the quote-unquote the one back in the day, but now you're different people. You're a different person, they're a different person, and your the one might not be your ex anymore. This is why it's so important to consider that possibility. Maybe you and your ex were meant for each other 5 years ago, but now, sadly, you're not. And even if you really want them back, would you truly be happy? If I could clip my fingers and get your ex back for you right now, but they're not going to have changed to the person they once were. Instead, we're going to be the person which ended the relationship, so I can bring them back, click of a finger, they're back with you, but they're exactly the same person that ended the relationship. Are you truly going to be happy with that? Because I would suggest that there is a strong possibility that you weren't feeling that happy either at the time of a breakup. So this isn't about just bringing your ex back. You need to be aligned if this is going to be a reconnection which lasts. And if you're not, then sadly a breakup will happen again in the future. And that's why we do have to sometimes look at it and say, hey, I love my ex. I will always remember those memories. I do wish we could be together on the same page, but we're not. And not only would they be unhappy if we were together, but if I think of it logically, I would as well. Because the person that they are now, compared to the person that I am now, just is not a good fit. And maybe I need to be looking for somebody who could be the one for me right now. Because back in the day when we first met, they were perfect for me. But right now, my perfect person is someone I haven't yet met. Now, if you would like advice and support about how to try and increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, or if you would like support about how to try and move forward with your life and meet somebody even better, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website, www.dateme.tips, for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast about why they weren't the one. And point number 3 is the world is a smaller place. So in point number 1, I was touching upon the fact that there are 8 billion people living in the world. And even though there might be a scenario where you live in a fairly quiet rural area potentially, maybe you're feeling that there are not many matches to you locally, what I would say is that we live in a time where there is always a possibility of finding romance. Online dating has been around more than 20 years, and it's getting easier and easier to connect with people who don't live on our doorstep, who don't live next door, who don't live down the street. It's easier to connect with people that we wouldn't meet ordinarily. Now, not only that, the transport situation around the world is generally getting better and better and easier as well. For most people around the world, it's never been easier to do a bit of travelling, and therefore there is always a possibility of meeting new people and trying to make connections that you wouldn't have ordinarily done and wouldn't have ordinarily bumped into if we didn't live in the day and age that we do today. Now, don't get me wrong, long-distance relationships don't often last forevermore, especially if they don't have a goal where one day you could be living close by. So I wouldn't suggest you try and connect with somebody the other side of the world if you've got absolutely no interest or potentially go into that country per se. However, if you do have an open mind to this type of thing, there is always the possibility of making new connections with new people in faraway places. But how does this connect to your ex not being the one? Well, everything goes round in a circle, and we're going to be somewhat finishing today where we began. And that is the fact that with so many people in the world, how can we suggest that our ex is the only one for us when we haven't got to know all of the other potential people that we may have been able to connect with really deeply if we'd given them a chance? And therefore, what I'm trying to say in point number 3 is the world is a smaller place. It's not like it was 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. It's much easier to communicate, it's much easier to meet, it's much easier to connect, and it's much easier to build a relationship with somebody who matches with us, even if we wouldn't normally see them in our day-to-day life. And if we do this enough times, we're likely to find the love of our life and somebody who is the one right now. As I said in point number 2, your ex may have been the one back in the day, but now perhaps they're not. Well, you need to find somebody who is right now. And you can. You have the opportunity. You have a possibility. You've just got to put in the effort to do the looking, the seeking, the communication, really getting to know each other, and the dating. It's not easy. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be something where you go online and you meet the love of your life tomorrow. No, it's probably going to take a lot of conversations, a lot of dates, a lot of time. But if you're really looking for the one, then why wouldn't you want to put in that kind of effort? You and your ex right now are exes, and you are exes because, sadly, your dumper did not feel enough attraction towards you. You deserve somebody who does. Now, maybe in the future your ex-dumper will come round to the thought that you were the right person for them, and you will reconnect in the future. But if they don't, you can and will still find your happiness, your fulfillment, your excitement in life. You will still find that, but with somebody new, as long as you put in the effort, the work, and have the desire to get to know your new the one. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.